Hello everyone and welcome to ZP Productions. This is Richard here, and today we'll be having a first look at this lens here. This is the 70-200 F2.8L IS USM RF lens for the Canon EOS R system. This is arguably one of the most innovative lenses of its class that has came out in recent years. This will be a first look of the Canon 70-200 F2.8L IS USM lens for the EOS R. Now, the 70-200 is a wildly popular range. It is a workhorse in most people's bag. Be it a wedding photographer, doing portraiture, doing studio work, many people own a 70-200 and it remains one of the most popular lenses you could get out there. Now, Canon, when they launched the 70-200, or should I say when they announced the 70-200 RF lens, many people were amazed by its size and weight that Canon promised. So when it came out, it really lived up to its promise itself. Now, as you can see here, it fits into my palm, and if you want to really compare, this is the same size as a 24-70, just maybe slightly taller and also slightly heavier. If you want to compare it to a standard 70-200, this lens is a full 300 plus gram lighter at 1070 gram compared to a standard 70-200, which is about 1.4 kg or 1400 grams. And then if you look at it in terms of length, at the shortest length, which is 70mm here, as you can see, this lens is 149mm, and a standard 70-200 will be almost 200mm itself. Now, as I said, it's at 70mm because when you extend it to 200mm, this lens is very similar to the length of a 70-200 f2.8 in most brands, including the EF mount versions. Now, if you really want to compare it to something of a similar length and size, you can actually look at this here. This is the GF 250mm F4. Now, if you can see here itself, this is quite representative of a modern 70-200, and this is the RF 70-200 put side by side, and you can easily see that in terms of its length. And if you hold it in the hand, this is 1.4 kg and this is 1070 gram. It is a whole lot lighter. So really, this lens is good because of its size and weight. And if you can see this video here, I could easily top load this lens with a camera into my bag. Now that is a boon because in many places you cannot change lens, be like example in the beach or in snow. It really is a great thing that you can easily pull your lens out with your camera attached and then straight away shoot with it. So this 70-200 is really great, something that can fit in the bag easily. Now, the next thing I would like to talk about is the autofocus. But before that, let's look at the switches here. There is the stabilizer switches, and there's autofocus switches, and there is the full to infinity and 2.5mm to infinity switch. Now, this lens, when it comes to autofocus, goes as low as 70 cm, as close as 70 cm. So you can actually do relatively a good macro shot at 200mm, and it gives a 0.23 times magnification. And if you look at this video here, I can actually shoot an SD card quite well and magnify it so that I can actually see a lot of details on the card itself. That being said, in terms of autofocus speed, this camera doesn't disappoint on the EOS R. It is very fast, very decisive, as you can see in this video, jumping towards the target in front and behind quickly. Just to note, the EOS R isn't the fastest focusing camera in the world. Hopefully one day when Canon launch a sports version of the EOS R, this lens will truly shine on it. That's pretty much it for autofocus. In the field itself, I don't think there is much issue. I never faced a time where I could not actually lock focus on my model, and if my model is moving front and back a little, this lens do catch up pretty well. Now, there's one thing I noticed, that this lens in terms of eye detection isn't as great as the 85mm 1.2. Maybe it's because the 85mm 1.2 has a lot more separation, or it is really a lot sharper, so the camera could pick up the faces slightly easier than this lens. I'm not really sure. More testing is required for it. So when this lens was first launched, there was some serious error in terms of focusing really close. At 200mm, if you shoot at 70 cm, it will result in certain amount of front focusing. Canon has since fixed it in the latest firmware of 1.06. So if you do buy this lens, recently, just do a patch and make sure that you get your full functionality, including very close focusing at 70 cm, and this focusing is very accurate too. Now moving on, there's, as I say, there's a 2 stabilization switch here. So this lens do have inbuilt IS. The inbuilt IS of this lens is pretty okay. Gives me about 3 stop. As you can see in this video here, I can easily handhold at 1/25 shutter without much problem, and I get a relatively good and sharp shot. So that will give you about 3 to 4 stop of stabilization with the inbuilt IS of this lens itself. Using the same lens to shoot video, at 200mm, it isn't the most stabilized lens. I think that goes to like the Fuji 200 f2, but I can pretty much get a decent shot that doesn't look too shaky and rocky. So obviously the IS is working well, and there's nothing much to talk about it, because for most of the 70-200s in the world, there is some sort of IS built in, and they all pretty much give almost similar performance. The last thing is we talk about optical quality. After reducing all the weight and size, Canon do promise that this lens will work as good as a standard 70-200, and it really delivers. If you look at the photos here, 200mm or 70mm, it is sharp from corner to corner. There really isn't much issue or much complaints in terms of image quality. That being said, if you have looked in my previous review where I talk about CA, this lens do exhibit certain amount of CA. Now, most of these CA are lateral CA, so they can easily be corrected. In terms of longitudinal CA, I never noticed any very significantly bad ones. So I think this lens is pretty much okay for most situations in bright light. Definitely, it's not as good as 85 RF 1.2, but that being said, it performs amicably good corner to corner from 70mm to 200mm. So there's really not much to complain on. So if you look at these images here, I have done about 2 to 3 shoots with this lens. I think about 3 so far, or is it 4? It performed really well, and I'm pretty much impressed. Considering the size, the weight, and everything, I think this lens really stands up to its name as one of the most compact and useful lens you can ever get on the EOS R. So the last part of this I would like to talk about is the price and what I think about this lens. Now, this lens is not cheap. It is 2,609 USD in B&H, and in Singapore about 4,000 Sing dollars. So you could easily get 70-200 EF mount version on B&H at like what, 1,799, so a full 900 USD lesser. Or you can get one in Singapore at maybe 3,000 or even below 3,000 Sing dollars easily. So this lens is really costly versus the EF mount versions. And in terms of optic quality, I have tried it. My initial impression is that the 70-200, the older versions, do not perform any much lousier than this lens when it comes to optics. Maybe this lens is slightly superior, but I'm not too sure. I could not confirm because I do not have one side by side to compare. But that being said, you're going to pay $1,000 more for the great size, the great weight, and finally a lens that you could easily carry out and use. If you notice one thing, there is no tripod collar, and now that's not because Canon didn't provide one, but because this lens is so light, I never bothered using it before. I could easily handhold this lens all day, utilize it for my shoots, and never get fatigued from it. That 300 over grams of weight saving plus a shorter length really do help in managing the camera itself. Mounted on the EOS R, this is going to be a 1.6 kg setup, 1.7 kg setup. Now mounted on the EOS RP, now that is fantastic because that will result in something like a 1.5 to 1.6 kg setup. I think before this lens was launched, there really isn't much possibility of having such a light setup with a 70-200 equivalent f2.8, such a big aperture lens. So all in all, I think this lens is great. Now this lens may cost 1,000 Sing dollars more or maybe 900 USD more than its predecessor. But if you want the latest, greatest, and you want the lightest and smallest lens where you could easily top load into any bag, this is definitely a great choice. Now, I hope you enjoyed this first look here. This is a short video, as I said, and maybe the next time I'll cover more in depth with more videos on how this lens work, the minimum focusing distance, the sharpness from all the ranges, and also of course more portrait shots with this lens itself to really show you how great this lens is and how I feel about this lens overall after maybe a few months. I hope you enjoyed this video and see you next time.